I have studied World War II history, tactics, battles, fortifications all of my life. I was in the army, I lectured on German and Russian tactics. And I thought I knew everything in all of the important parts of that war. A war that permanently changed the world. So much new world-changing technology was created then, and much of it in secret German facilities, hiding underground and run by the SS. In this series, I'm trying to uncover the still classified and secret special programs run by the SS, separating fiction from fact by following the documents and the credible human sources, comparing it to what is actually on the ground. In this episode, we're going back to Lower Silesia. We're going to the site of the Henge, because I had a hunch that I would find something if I looked in a different place, and even I was surprised at what I found. It was something truly breathtaking. But first, to tie it all together, I want to take you to the basement, to the tunnels underneath Castle Furstenstein, and I want to share with you the theories of a very well-known local Polish historian, and I think his research is very relevant to what we're doing here. Also, I've found the possibility of Hitler's train to be parked not 10 kilometers away. Something very special was going on here, and some of it is still hiding, and I think I found the proof to share with you all. Project Riese was an extremely large and costly, mostly underground construction project that took place from at least 1943. Hitler took a very keen interest in this project and was often briefed on it. It is from the files of Albert Speer's ministry that we know about this, and in the same breath of air, several other high-level projects, such as the S3 Jonstal project, Lothar project, and construction projects at Mauerwald and Wolfslair. At least 200 million Reichsmarks was spent on Project Riese, 150 million alone in 1944, with over 28,000 people employed here. In 1944, the project used more cement than all of the air raid construction in Germany. And yet today, we're still trying to figure out exactly what they were doing here and why. Of course, the project eventually came under the auspices of the SS and General Hans Kammler. And some of the most prominent German scientists were involved in projects that were housed here. You come home after a long day digging through bunkers, crawling through underground hallways, and having bats crap on your face. And you go home to your castle. One of the most prominent and beautiful locations for Project Riese was Castle Furstenstein. And yes, I am referring to it as its pre-World War II name because I simply can't pronounce the Polish name and I don't want to offend anybody and not get invited back. It's one of the largest castles in Europe, the third largest in Poland. It was built between 1288 and 1292, and after numerous modifications and reconstructions, it now has over 400 rooms and an extremely interesting underground. The castle is situated on a high rocky tip of the bend of a river. Remember that because we'll get back to it later, it's important. The castle for centuries belonged to the powerful family of Hochberg. During this time, the castle was visited by some of the most prosperous people in the world. Princes, Tsar Nicholas I, and even John Quincy Adams was here. At the high water mark, the family and castle employed 9,000 people. However, in 1939, because of its debts, the castle with its entire surrounding area was taken over by the German treasury and eventually confiscated by the authorities. Many researchers believe that the castle was to become headquarters of the Third Reich Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was also claimed to be constructed in order for a new and secure headquarters for Adolf Hitler to be built with an underground bunker. Either way, Organization Tod took over the mansion and began digging in the basement, literally. It is still claimed that there are many chambers underground constructed during the war that have still not been opened and bricked over. In the rocks under the castle, the Germans dug huge tunnels using forced labor from Groß-Rosen concentration camp, as well as countless civilian firms from all over Europe had been working here supposedly already from 1941, way before the Riese project actually started, which is interesting. The tunnels led to a shaft with a diameter of 6 meters. There were several access tunnels, It's important to note that there are two separate tunnel constructions going on here. One immediately under the actual castle, consisting of an upper level of smaller tunnels with an access from the actual castle. But there's a much larger tunnel system 30 meters below, and that is under the courtyard. It had a narrow gauge railway for construction leading into the tunnels, and it was large enough for trucks to enter. But there's something else in here. These rooms are not just rooms or shelters for high-level dignitaries. These were built with a very dedicated purpose in mind. There's a very well-known Polish historian who's done some very interesting research into what that might be, and I tend to concur with his conclusions, and I want to share them with you. However, when we talk about this castle, there are so many rumors surrounding this location. It is quite a bit of a tangle. One of the most predominant rumors that you must have heard is that of a secret rail link that had been bricked over to an underground rail tunnel where a train that supposedly departed East Prussia full of loot and gold has been hiding, and people have been looking for the supposed gold train ever since. I would like to address that by actually showing you what's here. Today there's only access to the main tunnels from a side of the mountain, which is below the castle. Back during construction during the war, there was the huge access shaft and several more, one right in the center of the courtyard that has now been blocked off. I will say it was very much reminiscent of what I saw of the huge access stairwells on the east wall. According to a report by Boguslav Wokosarinski, referring to documents found at the archives at Koblenz, dated 1943. The castle was to become a repository for documents according to the Reich Security Main Office. Codenamed of the operation was Brabant Joseph I. It was also claimed by former prisoners who survived and worked here that at the end of the war the castle began to see arriving transports of large boxes filled with unknown objects. In the tunnels, you can, if you pay attention, find a lot of traces that was indicating deliberate blocking of string tunnels. John Weiss, a former prisoner who later immigrated to America, he visited the underground of the castle in 1985. He claimed that nothing looked the way it did towards the end of the war, and there was lacking many rooms that he had seen at that time. Another anomaly was that we know Castle Furstenstein was part of Project Riese. Project Riese was not officially launched until mid-1943. However, according to castle records, already from 1942 were workers brought here from Italy, followed by 400 miners from the Donbass. And in 1944, approximately 3,000 forced laborers and prisoners were working here. But that means the underground construction started before the official launch of Project Riese. Polish researchers have also noted that given the huge quantity of building materials, reinforced concrete, steel, cement, sand, that was transported here, of which there's records, does not match up with the volume of the underground tunnels and the construction visible today. So just like the other Riese tunnel projects, we know from the numbers given by Speer that there's at least 100,000 square meters of constructed tunnels that has not been found today. Now please make a note that these tunnels are constructed just like the east wall tunnels in the shape of an egg. And if you note the rebar sticking out of the walls, that was in order to connect an upper floor for mechanical pipes and so on and so forth. So there was never a reason or room for a train to maneuver here, but these rooms are what makes me suspicious. This is not a room that is made for a dignitary to live in. This is not a shelter for high-level officials. And if you look at some of the grooves and drainage in the floors, I've never seen that in any bunker anywhere. These have the feel of mechanical, technical research. There's a very specific reason why these were built this way and configured the way they were. This was not made for trains. No gold train would come in here. This was for working bunkers to keep people secret. experimentation could have taken place in here, I can buy that. No trains, no way. Too low and no access. And no, I have no idea why I'm whispering, except there's a very nice echo down here. Also, you see a lot of these smaller tunnels, they are at angles that would mean even narrow gauge rails would not be able to navigate here. And the main tunnels, tunnel rail, I suspect were only to transport materials in and out during construction and to be removed after. Speer and Todt had ideas to make this a glamorous retreat or welcome for foreign dignitaries. It was of course envisioned this was a possible place for Adolf Hitler to visit or be. Another interesting point is, here the Todt organization was carrying out the labor, but it was under command of the Luftwaffe. If it indeed was a Hauptquartier for Hitler, none of the other ones of those were commanded by Luftwaffe staff. However, here's one of the original Riese staff IDs. And in this photo you can still see the narrow gauge rail running through the Knights' quarters and to the large pit that you see in these photos, the center of the courtyard that is now covered up, and a bunker that was placed on top of that courtyard. After the war, the Russians looted the place. Then they took it over for various uses. However, an interesting account, Russian General Marek Ulbricht, who donated the photos from his mission in 75-76 here, where he was ordered to demolish some of the bunkers surrounding the castle, including the pillbox in the courtyard. Also a Tobruk was demolished. He stated he did not know or understand what the purpose the Germans had carried out the reconstruction of the castle, but it certainly was not adapted to the needs of a Wehrmacht or Hitler's headquarters. The construction of all its quarters were carried out in parallel with construction of the entire security system around them. For example, in the Wolf's Lair, there were traces of security system and lots of mines. Here, there was none of that. 4 small reinforced concrete bunkers could not really be a security system for a Hitler's headquarters. He noted there were supposedly plans for an elevator shaft leading up to the towers to bring munition to flak cannons mounted there. However, the towers were nowhere near strong enough for such mounts. The result of the demolition can still be seen in the area around the castle today. And an interesting note for those of you who pay attention, there was lots of red brick incorporated in the bunker construction. I have to say, no train ever entered the tunnels underneath here. The construction simply did not allow for trains to come in here. Going deeper than here, you'd be below the forest floor, and time would not have allowed for that either. There was also no access from the castle down below, so for an Adolf Hitler to arrive here by train and secretly make his way up into the castle unseen would also not have been possible. However, if you understand the way Hitler would travel, let's for argument's sake explore that possibility of this being a temporary or secondary headquarters type structure for him. There are smaller tunnels in connection with the actual castle. And not far from here, there is the main rail link. Not far from that is a very large, in fact, Poland's longest tunnel. And if you understand how Hitler would travel by train and have the train needing security while he was not using it, it is entirely possible from that point of view. However, an underground tunnel under the castle is simply not possible. The castle is sitting on a small mountain peak within a valley surrounded by hills on top of what is essentially a very large hilltop. There's a difference between the level of the main rail lines and the floor of the castle of up to 500 meters. Terrain simply will not allow for an offshoot. However, the rail line is rather near, and since Hitler set a bit of a trend with his Train America, everyone who is somebody in the Third Reich got their own special trains. So having Poland's longest tunnel right nearby to position these trains out of bombing range in complete safety after depositing their dignitaries quite close to the castle is an option. Let me show you that tunnel before we return to the castle underground. Remember, Hitler's train is pretty much like an Air Force One at the time, a mobile command center. It was armed, it was well defended, and it needed serious protection whenever it was not in use or was pulled off the track. Several bunkers were made for trains of 2-meter thick cement throughout the war, but the longest tunnel in Poland would do just fine. This double railway tunnel runs under the Malowowice mountain, 720 meters above sea level. It is the longest tunnel in Poland at 1,600 meters. The first one was built in 1879, and the second one began construction in 1909. Both tunnels was in use throughout the entire war, and the area have several other large rail tunnels in them. Between the two parallel tunnels was 5 connecting service tunnels. So, this is where Hitler's train should have been. Or could have been, or should have been. We have spent a lot of time in a lot of tunnels. This is really cool because there's no lighting, no idea what we're walking into. We don't even know we're walking into a wall. But this is where Hitler's train would have sheltered if he went here for any length of time. But when he was here in 44, he did not bring the train. Or do we know? Wann Hitler hier in 44 war, vielleicht war, da hatte er nicht seinen Zug mitgebracht. Er kam nicht beim Zug.
Ich weiß nicht. Ja.
Dies war der erste Teil und dies ist der zweite Teil von Tunnel. So diesen sind neuer. Okay, so this is a different era of construction separation here, which makes sense.
Here must be technical installation, yeah.
For the electrical and
water.
Yeah. This is fascinating.
I don't know why we do not see
the other end.
the end.
Are we supposed to see light at the other end?
Yeah.
There's no light at the end of the tunnel.
One of.
This is one of the guard checks?
Or
Für Wakten oder nur
nee, für
Schnapsflasche? These are not a protective walls. These are to duck in for when the train would pass for safety. It was not set up as a sentry. Oh, so this is another change of construction. Oh, what are you doing?
Here is saved from the exporters. Yeah.
Oh, of course.
There was a gang here.
So, okay. Was there a tunnel up?
Shafts.
Shafts, okay.
And all this mountain,
Yeah.
block of mountain, have more shafts and tunnels. Yeah.
Have they all been accounted for? Weißt du, wo die alle ist? Oder sind da immer noch unbekannte Tunnels? Für Sicherheit.
4 sind unbekannt, ja.
Und dafür kommen alle hier die Gold und die Glocke zu suchen. Die hoffen es zu finden in ein unbekannter Tunnel. This is a small connector tunnel to the other tunnel.
It's a technical corridor. These corridors are few in this tunnel. Yeah.
And is this still a live train rail?
The wet atmosphere, they block the light. Yeah.
So is this the tunnel that was parallel when we was outside?
Yeah,
What's blocking it? It looks like there's a thing.
it shows really interesting. Yeah.
I know this is. And here's train tracks.
Look at this. Words was stopped.
I hope he didn't lose his head. These are the German markings that was here. This was to just mark a place in the tunnel.
Yeah.
So if there's a problem, you say there's a problem at number 39.
Yeah.
So you have all these shafts, and here's definitely a tunnel in there, as you can clearly tell. And again, you have a long tunnel. Even for train, there's offshoots in every direction. We're running into more and more fog.
Yeah.
And
Here is the place, the central point of tunnel, the place where the special train will be stay.
for the smoke.
Yeah, for the smoke.
Oh, so this is where the smoke would be.
This is where for the smoke. They goes on the top of this mountain. Yeah.
So and then of course it's spread so you can't see there's a train underneath. That's really clever. So you can start up the train in here, and warm air is coming from here. You can actually feel the warm air. That's interesting. That's it, and that's why there's more fog here, because the hot air from the outside coming from the mountain is meeting the cold air of the tunnel. This is what you do at home when you watch this to get the atmosphere. You light a cigar, you sit in front of your refrigerator, and close your eyes and just listen to my voice. And you'll have, I guess, maybe how they feel here. It's very hard to describe how intense a tunnel is, especially when you, as me, don't know what's at the other end.
People cannot, in wartime, the local people cannot going these places. That was a closed area.
So it would have been easy for the Germans to hide something.
Yeah.
But we're more leaning towards art, treasures than the gold. None of us seem to be buying much. And we stand very still. We can hear a lot of water running, which I would imagine is less zen and slightly unnerving. This was the meter marker, wasn't it? That's the old... That's porcelain, yeah.
Here was electrical line.
So certainly it's not a stretch to think that a VIP dignitary train could be housed there after depositing its VIPs at the city next to the castle named Walburich. It's also claimed that this city and city hall was to be, or was, connected by underground tunnels. But there's something else. If you'd seen the beginning of this series, you would know that General Kammler had pulled out all the stops, rallying every asset he could in order to protect Prague from the Russians, and Pilsen and the Skoda-Werke, in order to keep the Russians away as long as possible, for him to salvage, destroy, rescue, bury whatever it was of secret technology he was working on. But there's something else. General Ferdinand Schroner was the one who was in command of the defense of Prague. Later Field Marshal Schroner, the last commanding general of the German army. He was here. He was in the castle. He was in Lower Silesia. He had his army staff headquarters at a school in Szeszavono, and the SS was stationed not far in Gaj. Not only that, but the defense of this town did not stop just because the armistice on May 8th. They fought on for 2 more days, and work was still going on at the castle underground on May 10th, when finally Russian tanks rolled into town. At a time when everyone was fleeing the Russians, they were still fighting for this part of the world. They were still working on the basement and the tunnels under the castle, and Field Marshal Schroner was not far. There's something here that was clearly worth protecting or hiding in a significant way. And a local Polish researcher and historian have come up with a very good suggestion as to what that might be. Historian Tomasz Jurek has spent a large part of his life researching and excavating this area. And there's this building that's constructed not far from the main tunnel entrances. And there's something very interesting about its very shape and design. And, as Joseph might say, it's a little bit of a high-octane speculation. However, there might be something to it. If not with this building, then with the Riese project and what it might be for, especially given that we found what seems to be a heavy water production facility not far. Let me explain. The standard claim by the authorities, especially here in Riese, is that it is a water treatment plant. However, no water treatment facility or plant looks anything like this, not in Germany, not in Poland. However, there are two similar shaped buildings that existed at this very time in history, 42-44. One of them is outside Berlin, at Gottow, at the former Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. One that looks like this, where Kurt Diebner experimented with nuclear fission. It was the first German nuclear reactor. And if you take a look at the Chicago pile, in 1942, Enrico Fermi, he attained nuclear fission on pile 1. This was a structure built in this shape. However, it was built of wood inside the gymnasium of the Chicago University. And if you look at the pipe that runs through the center, there's a similar pipe here that runs through the center of this structure. Let me explain why I'm actually entertaining this notion. The Chicago pile was the first artificial nuclear reactor. It was the first human-made, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. It was led by Enrico Fermi. It was the first technical achievement for the Manhattan Project. It was built under the viewing stands of the original Stag Field. Although the project's civilians and leaders had quite some misgivings about the possibility of a disastrous runaway reaction, they trusted his calculations, and they let him go ahead. The reactor used natural uranium. That required a very large amount of material in order to reach criticality, along with graphite used as a neutron moderator. The reactor contained 45,000 ultra-pure graphite blocks, weighing 360 short tons, and was fueled by 5.4 short tons of uranium metal and 45 short tons of uranium oxide. Unlike most nuclear reactors, it had no radiation shielding or a cooling system. Even the Chicago Pile 2 looked similar to what we're seeing right here, and that was blown up and buried, but it looked the same. And a quick insert here, Otto Hahn discovered nuclear fission already in 1938. He did, Lisa Meitner did not, and he got a Nobel Prize for it. Back to Gottow outside Berlin. At this facility, nuclear fission experiments, designated G1, G3, had a lattice of 6,800 uranium oxide cubes, about 25 tons, and it used paraffin as a nuclear moderator. The work verified Karl-Heinz Hocher's calculations that cubes were better than rods, and rods were better than plates. The G3 experiments were small-scale designs, but it generated an exceptional high rate of neutron production. Here, work was also done to explore a nuclear reaction through the detonation of explosives. The first effort started in April 1939, just months after the discovery of nuclear fission in December 1938 by Hahn. It was halted for a short period during the German invasion of Poland. However, a second effort began under the administrative purview of the Wehrmacht Heereswaffenamt on September 1, 1939, under the command of Erich Schumann. Schumann was a brilliant German physicist who specialized in acoustics and explosives, and music for some reason. He was a general officer in the army and a professor at the University of Berlin and the Technical University of Berlin. When Adolf Hitler came to power, he joined the Nazi Party, as did Diebner. During World War II, his position in the Army Ordnance Office and the Army High Command made him one of the most powerful and influential physicists in Germany, and he and Diebner was working on a nuclear bomb. But we all assumed that a nuclear reaction is large, reinforced, heavy, and expensive. But the Chicago pile was a structure built of wood in a gym, and Diebner's was beginning to operate in the early 40s, at least experimentation-wise. So why would it not be extremely plausible that now in 43, 44, there might be other nuclear structures built or planned or designed or under construction, both for energy, something Germany was short on, and weapons research? And both Deibner, Struckmann, and Kammler, and many other brilliant German scientists were determined to build a weapon as well as create nuclear energy. Now, Thomas Jurek tested this building and found no initial radiation. That means it could be it was not finished by the end of the war. I will test the soil for myself when I get there in a month. However, he did find radiation around other parts of the tunnels underneath the castle. So, a very circumstantial case could be made that research was at least being planned here, and given that they worked continuously till beyond the last day of the war, they might have hidden something here, or at the very least removed it, leading us back to Ludwigsdorf and the Henge and a very special discovery I found there. I believe there is a link, and Lower Silesia is full of secrets, war secrets, and a lot of interesting research and development and production was happening in basements all over this region. At the beginning of this show, I told you I would share everything I found with you, and I'll be absolutely honest with you what I found, where I found it, and what I've seen. And this is one of those days. What I'm trying to do in this series, that will last for many more years, because I intend to go to every one of the secret weapons technology, locations, factories, plants, development, research facilities, both of Kammler and of the German army, to try to forensically piece together what happened there, what could have happened there, cross-reference that with contemporary technology, what we can find in the archives, especially the Russian archives, and build a at least circumstantial case for why we might need to start digging in particular places. I had to go back to the Henge because it was inconceivable to me, for one, that this huge power plant with 5,000 employees had been there for so long and there were no photos of that area where the Henge was. I found that strange. So I did a lot of digging, and I actually found photos from 48, from 73, and from some 20 years ago when they started reconstructing and rebuilding. I'm going to share them with you right now. One of the most striking things about the Henge is its actual size. It seems bigger than any water or cooling tower I have ever seen. However, in 1948, this photo was taken in what looks like a pool underneath the Henge. It's one of the workers at the factory after it closed. It clearly shows rods sitting in a basin of water, and here in the 70s they have begun to decay and break and be laying scattered around inside the Henge. I'm not an expert on cooling towers, and I don't know if they come this large, but I do know there is a basin underneath them, and this matches up. However, they covered up this entire foundation with dirt, which also means that the holes that we suspected in the last episode from here were some sort of access port. Well, they are brand new. They are fire pits built by the locals in the early 2000s, both here on top of the access bunker, and has nothing to do with anything that happened during the war. And if you examine this photo closely, you will see the transport conveyor belt that's running next to the Henge. Here's the house on top of the mountain in the background. Now, in the old photos I found from before the war, you clearly see there are cooling towers surrounding the factory and the power plant. However, in just about all of them, the Henge location is just off shot, or there's a building blocking it just from the angle. So now I have to go back there and stand in the location where that photo was taken and determine if the Henge location was just out of the shot or it was in there and the cooling tower was not built or there just before the war. It could have been and then repurposed by Germans for something else. However, if these photos are what they seem to be, the ones I found of the basin under the cooling tower, then that is what it would be. a very, very, very large cooling tower. And I keep referring to it as a water tower. It couldn't have been a water tower because the tank would have been impossibly large. This is extremely large. And I just don't think a water tower with the tank would have been there at that point be possible. However, when I go back, I'll have to go to the locations of the other cooling towers that are no longer there, but find the basis of them and see what they look like compared to this. But let's for a minute ask ourselves, what are we really looking for here? We're looking for research and development of extremely high-level technology and all the support that entails, which includes logistics and access. We from numerous reports read that this testing took place in underground mines where facilities and structures were built inside. That also means you need access, and a lot of the tunnels here were vertical, not horizontal. When they started building the museum here some decades ago, they had flooded tunnels to deal with, and they had whatever had been left over from that time of decay. There's also a lot of tunnels directing waterways throughout this mountain and off it. Interestingly enough, as you have these door separators with hinges for extremely heavy doors that were red brick with masonry that they had restored to look like they did when they found them. There were a lot of vertical tunnels not really suitable to bring technology and gear into if you're going to do any kind of research or experimentation inside old mines. You need a horizontal tunnel. And I found photos of old tunnel entrances, at least two. One of them under this house that has been covered up and been capped. The way it's been capped, it looks like it was a vertical tunnel. However, underneath one of these buildings that are mostly not there anymore, there were what looked like horizontal tunnels. And that's what you need to bring everything into a mountain where you need to hide stuff or work on stuff or protect stuff. But you need the access. And from day one I saw that little access building that is guarding the tunnels that are the technical tunnels that are running around under the Henge, that are running around wherever they're going to the power plant. That building has been bothering me from the moment I saw it because I knew something had been done to it. I knew it had been faked, for lack of a better word. It has been rebuilt 7 ways from Sunday. Now I know that there are tunnels that are capped. You walk down the tunnel, you see there's a cap, there's a brick wall. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a deliberate effort on the part of someone post-war to cover up entrance tunnels that are leading somewhere else from that building. And they've been nicely bricked up to match in with all the existing brickwork. Now, of course, they renovated it all for the museum, and that's fine. This, I think, happened before that. And I wanted to look. I had an idea when I went back here on this last day. And this is the journey, and this is what I found. And now I know. Now you'll know. Now what is interesting about these halls that were definitely made for ammunition manufacturing, no problem there, looking at the walls, the building, the structure, makes perfect sense. But the access control point to the area is right here below this hill leading up to the structure here. And these tunnels, here's a tunnel entrance, which is a maintenance tunnel, quite clearly. But you can crawl in here. It's sealed off and filled up. However, this tunnel leads in the direction of the manufacturing, and this tunnel leads back to under the Henge. And that direction. So here's a pathway to the building. The road is up here. It's an interesting rock with holes in it. A lot of scattered cement debris. Walkway flooring into the building that was slightly raised. That is the door. That's a brick building, hardened roof with a platform. This could have been check-in. This could have been access control paperwork. You know, the paperwork the Russians stole. Very small building with porcelain and tile. I would imagine there would have been a toilet, bathroom, something in here. This pathway is pointing in the general direction of the Henge, where we have this large building where munitions will be loaded onto trucks. This is a different building than the one we saw yesterday, which means several large buildings were erected here. And that makes perfect sense. Trucks would drive up here, load and unload. There's a rail network as well. Down here is the remnants of another building this is the lower ammunition building. The ammunition production facility is right there, and the loading is right here. And once again, the blast walls from this facility, from the chemical facility, is pointing this direction. Although there's a hill in between, certainly if a large explosion had occurred, this building would have been touched. And if this was a building used for storing or transporting munitions through these two gates, that could have been a little risky. The layout of a lot of these things are counterintuitive from a tactical point of view. This could also have been a motor pool. I am imagining this is the motor pool, and it is. This is where you would work on trucks and vehicles. So this is the workshop for the trucks. That makes far more sense. The walls are bricked up, probably repurposed after the war. Try to get a hint of the original use. These are smaller rooms, seriously reinforced windows, electrical on the walls, but there's been some heavy duty hinges on this. Smaller offices again, or smaller rooms. There's no reason, well, on one hand there's no reason to have a big office with a window facing the blast wall of a munitions plant. So this would also have been workshops with an interesting layout. But it's not heavily, but it is a reinforced building. Where the hinges have the option of being reinforced. Well, I recognize this. This was a bathroom. Oldie but a goodie. Again, underground tunnels, access tunnels, shower. And when we say shower, do we say shower or do we say decontamination? And here we have an access tunnel. Again, everywhere there's tunnels. Everywhere something underground is pointing, which leads me to believe that inside the tunnels next to the Henge, there must have been tunnels that would have been sealed off and concealed leading off in other directions. Otherwise, there's no reason to bring 3 trail tracks. There's been no reason to bring 3 small gauge train tracks into a building that only has 1 small room and a bunch of access tunnels. Makes no sense. So something is missing down there. So these buildings are all surrounding the Henge. Looks like 2118. Again, more electricity shooting off. Building, and here's a chimney. There's a chimney. That's interesting. I did not see anything inside that looked like a fireplace. A lot of rubble. No radiation increase or decrease around here. Roadways everywhere to and from, and then you have access tunnels. Access tunnels, hatches, 2 tunnels that are covered up. Again, we are back to tunnel entrances, and up here an air intake, probably one of the ammunition storages. What I do see is the foundation for the conveyor belt, supposedly, although these are both at the same level. Down here are the buildings, manufacturing, production, and here's the tunnel leading into the munition storage where the trucks could go, and the stairs up to the conveyor belt. And the road continues with power lines running parallel to it. Again, the power poles are older, could easily predate these buildings. Here's the road where trucks would come and load and unload munitions. Continue down to more bunkers, secure houses for munitions. And right here is the corner of the Henge and the power plant. 100, 300 meters away respectively. This is where my thoughts of secret technology testing, radioactive technology testing, special technology testing on the flytrap comes to be buried, because you will not be testing experimental, radioactive, dangerous technology right there in between the power plant and the buildings filled with munitions. The Germans were not stupid people. Now, if it was a water tank, water tower, that would give me much more sense of concern. Because if it was, that means you had an enormous amount of energy produced here. And we already seen the foundations, what was to be an experimental nuclear facility. What do you need for uranium enrichment? Power, water, space, facilities, electricity. And all that is built here. So what is in these hills so from the munitions building by the road is foundation of what I would imagine could have been a loading bay, wooden structure that is no longer. It could have been a control point, checkpoint. So what I thought was a loading ramp, well, it possibly was, because up there is the remnants of the conveyor belt leading up towards the mountains, and a building that is rather tall, interestingly enough. And down there is the other building. So this is the foundation down here for how the spiders got into my hair. And it stinks a bit down here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Remember all those miners who died from the gas fumes?
Here you have side of a building down on pillars. Damn, what I'm looking at. What the hell am I looking at? I don't know what this is. I'm assuming that all the various Norse gods will now not drop this building on my head. What the hell is this? What the hell was that? There's an underneath this building. That's all caved up. And down here is another access tunnel. Now do you see this? Right there. It's the same access tunnels leading down to the Henge with the sound grooves there. That the electrical cables leading in to the structure. Very heavy duty electrical cabling ran from the power plant into the mountain. This is pointing into the mountain, where these electrical cables that are way deeper than the buildings above. Jeez. What the hell are they doing here? What this building was, I don't know. Let's get the Geiger counter. And look at this, there's more. Down here again. I can leave this on. Holy shit. I love our local guides, but and I love our spider friends here, but sometimes you gotta do this on your own. Jesus. You're looking at some very serious structure going on here. And everywhere underneath this, there are access tunnels leading between the power plant into the mountain. Down here is another building and another piece that we again will pray to the Norse gods to not drop on me, because then you won't be seeing this, and you gotta see this. You gotta see this. Ducts for channeling. This would be a duct for electrical cabling going in down there or something. I know military stuff. This is construction, this is engineering, this is manufacturing. This is a very deep hole in the ground. And a protective wall. Damn. 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 Jeez, look at that. Look at this. I've stepped into a hole. Look at that. There's steps leading up. And that looks like tiling for a bathroom. That's hanging right there. But these steps, you would have been able to... No, that's not steps. That's holders for something. And I'm in a hole. I really am. They filled it up with branches, leaves, and shit. I get that. And right here, we're overlooking. I am on top of the bunkers. I am on top of the bunkers that had a slight radiation, but not up here. Not in this hole. And down here, more trenches. Hiding. Foundation, or pillars for
an access tunnel. There's the wall, the other one. I see a half dome. I see a half dome. Goddamn, half domes are awesome. God damn it, this is one of the tunnels. Look at this. This is a caved-in tunnel. Here's the archway next to the building, and here's the other archway coming over there. This is the top of an X-shaped tunnel that has been caved in. Damn. See this big hole? Here's the tunnel. That was another cave-in, I'm guessing. Another holes. And here, I'm standing on top of a caved-in tunnel. Not far from the complex. Which means that if there are this many deep underground tunnels, all these tunnels, they must have been connected. I'm not 50 meters from the main entrance to the MOLTKE complex. It's the other side. That's what they did. They excavated, they built tunnels, and then they covered them up. Then they became subterranean. So what's underneath here? Is this a small access tunnel? It's a parallel line that is obviously not natural. Jesus. I see a clearing. There's holes everywhere in this piece of the side wall. Another piece of the wall. This could have been a caved-in tunnel where the dome stayed intact. A little shaky camera on the ground because I am just. This is not on the official tour. Yeah. So now we know something else for a fact. There are tunnels leading into the mountains that have been blown up, hidden, destroyed.
I always had my suspicions or my doubts about the Henge being a testing platform for any kind of research or experimental aircraft or significant technological research, because when you research very, very high-end, very expensive and technologies like this with what we have been told, say, the Bell contained, it's a very volatile piece of equipment. And having it potentially hover around right next to your main power plant and right next to your munition explosives production facility just seems like the ingredients for a really bad day. However, if this is an enormous cooling tower with the enormous power plant that we now know was funneling enormous amounts of electricity on these shelves, on these cables, into the mountain. And I've seen shelves like this before in many different other types of bunkers that are slightly different, but they separate the cables. Also, the wrapping was not like the rubber we have today. So you wanted to separate, especially cables like this. Remember what we saw at Fort Castle? And the tunnels I found, that broken tunnel is at least 10 meters below the munition, the small tunnels I found up by the road, by the munition buildings. So it has nothing to do with munition. This is 10, 15 meters below that, running straight into the mountain. And when you look at the destroyed tunnels and the remnants you saw when I walked through above ground, that's what it would look like if you have technical tunnels underneath and you set up an explosion. It will lift up and it will cave in. But that means that at the ends of these cave-ins, there are tunnels to be found. So now I know where to look when I get back there. And it clearly demonstrates that the bunker had been sealed off because there's no sign of these tunnels leading into the mountain. And again, where did all that electricity go? Von Arden, he clearly said that he brought several cyclotrons to this area. Well, they need electricity. He also stated to some of the Russian researchers post-war that there was a device that was tested in an underground mine, in a facility built in an underground mine. Well, that would need and require electricity. That would also explain the 100,000 square meters of cement that are missing. We saw in Speer's archives the amount of cement that brought into the Riese project, and from what we have found today and what's available to see today, there's at least 100,000 square meters of cement missing that had been constructed. That means it's been covered up. That means it is still underground. So if we follow the electricity, follow the power, we might get to those facilities, those testing facilities. And if we have to take Spornberg's post-war trial account into account, he is the one that talked about a bell-like device with the counter-rotating spheres of Mercury, which means there must be Mercury possibly to be found in the area. But we're also talking about something that was a huge 9-foot tall bell-shaped device made of ceramics. I am not going to make anything fly that's made of ceramics. That seems like a recipe of something bad when it comes down crashing, spilling out mercury. I'm not sure that the Bell device is not part of the AEG Charity-Anlage project that was decisive for the war effort that Schumann was involved in. AEG was big shots. And if they were doing something that had to do with high voltage and electricity, and we know that for a fact from the reference from the meeting at the AEG. So the AEG was doing something with Schumann, who was in charge of the nuclear projects. And Schumann and Diebner are the ones my money is on for having done something. And clearly they go back to relationships with Kamla and back at Jonstal, where they were supposedly having tested a plutonium bomb or two, and were working on weapons. But Schumann, parallel with that, working with AEG, we're looking at some very serious, heavily funded technology that had to do with electricity. Did I mention that the very large power plant here was built, founded, and run before the war by AEG? Just thought I'd throw that out at you. Back to following the electricity into the mountain. I don't think a bell needs to fly to be a significant contributor to what went on. It could have been a cyclotron. It could have been, if we look at the archives that was found in Prague at the American Embassy post-war that has since been released, we see signs of particle accelerators, cyclotrons, remote-controlled guided rockets, and jets. Now, Prague is only 2.5 hours drive from here. And Kamla was in charge of rockets and jets and special development. And he had everybody and everything fight to save Prague and to keep the Russians at bay, to get whatever he had out. The Russians got some of it. Hopefully the archives will let that go when I get there and learn Russian. However, we have now a picture of technological development in an area that encompasses rockets, technology, cyclotrons, particle accelerators, electricity, high voltage, big, well-funded companies. If the AG Charity-Anlage project was the Bell, or what became the Bell, or could have spun off in separate directions, it could be that it was housed here and tested here underground in a secure facility where it couldn't be gotten to, where you had plenty of power funneled into it. And you have Schröner's army that was protecting and defending with every scrap he could the area of Silesia and Prague until days after the war, when everyone is trying to desperately get away from the Russians. They're still doing construction to the last day +2 at the castle. You had the Sonderkommando of 200 men out of the Riese project, of the last prisoners that were said to have been constructing something and then all shot and killed, as opposed to the other prisoners that were let go. You have prisoners going back to the castle years and years after stating that there are rooms missing. Well, there's a lot of things that are missing here as well. But this all points to, I think I could go before a judge and make a circumstantial case that with the documentation we have from Spears archives, from AEG, from several other archives, statements made post-war by high-level scientists like Van Ardenne and Spornberg, if the Polish would please release his testimony so we could read it in detail, it points to research being done here. Serious, expensive research. And remember, there's 200 million Reichsmark spent on Riese at least. And if the AG was involved, that was a separate budget. They would bring in their money. If you spend 200 million Reichsmarks and 28,000 laborers to build something, that doesn't necessarily mean the money spent by the companies like the AG, Farben, Nobel, to bring in their equipment in these facilities to test, run, and work and develop. There are separate budgets involved here. And let me paint another picture when it comes down to the money. The SS would rent out slave labor, unskilled slave labor, at 3 Reichsmarks a day to IG Farben. There was about 40,000 working at the Bune plant in Auschwitz, just to pick one. What is that, 43 million Reichsmarks a year, rough profits to the SS. Well, you have to feed them, pay the guards, so on and so forth. So you're looking at 20, 30 million extra Reichsmarks for that one location of the Bune plant. You had the SS renting out slave labor for money all over the country in the occupied territories. Plus you had enormously wealthy companies funneling money into their projects that were being protected by the SS. You had the army, you had all these different funding mechanisms for these projects. And in the middle of all of it, you have poor little Heisenberg, who for the better part of the 30s were not getting along with Heinrich Himmler and the SS. And they wrote horrible things about him until he was his mother knew Himmler's mother, I believe it was, or it could have been sister, I honestly forget. However, Heisenberg was rehabilitated, but his project got 8 million Reichsmarks. That's all Heisenberg got. And you're looking at just the Peenemünde facility alone was 300 million Reichsmarks. And now you're looking at 200 million Reichsmarks that we know of just to construct the Riese locations. You're looking at the Jonstal S3 project. 26,000 laborers and workers out there. And you go there today, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. I found books written in 1947 by American soldiers who were there who claimed there were huge underground tunnels and complexes built. There are statements from laborers that claim they brought in porcelain and carpeting and flooring, and they built an immaculate underground facility. The term used in 1947 by the American was underground city. And today we're being told there's nothing there. I'm going there in a month, and we'll see what is nothing there. There's been a great deliberate effort across the board to hide things that we from wartime records know existed. And the same with the technology. We're not just looking for nuclear bombs, nuclear reactors. We're not just looking for plutonium bombs. We're looking for a technological development that has been hidden. Because I don't know what the Charity Anlage from AAG was. You don't. I do, however, think that post-war there has been a link between the name Charity Anlage to covering the bell. And then people started saying, well, the Charity Anlage, the bell was hidden in or researched under the Charity Anlage, which is also the name of a Berlin hospital. I doubt that had anything to do with it, unless we're talking about a contemporary technology that was doing something completely different that had to do with medical research, of which an abundance took place out at Auschwitz and by IG Farben. So there's enough to start looking at here. But one thing I'm absolutely certain of is that there are unfound chambers, tunnels in the mountains in Lower Silesia. I don't think we're looking for art or gold, which we were. If the Germans had no chance to get it out and hide it, they would have stored it underground, blew up the tunnels, flooded them. And there's been plenty of attempts to try to get in to those tunnels after the war. They were so far unsuccessful because they're deep mining shafts that are flooded. It's dangerous, there are gas, workers died in the 30s there. So it's a good place to hide things. But there's another way. It may not be the vertical tunnels, it may be the horizontal tunnels. And those I found. So now I'm going back. And I would love to hear from all of you who have experience in power plants, with cooling towers, with electronics, who knows something more than I do. I am not a scientist. But I can see from what I'm looking at on the ground, something's missing. From what I see in the files, the papers, something's missing.
Power plant. Down there is the fly trap. And up here is the mountain with more secrets. There's another looked like an access road that would lead up to a whole bunch of unnatural looking hills. Hole in the ground. There's a little corner. This is definitely built up. Back towards where we came from. This would be a very long excavation, very long survey to document everything that has been found, that's visible, and more interestingly, what's not visible. The evidence on the ground supports that there are numerous bunkers, entrances, and here's another foundation for a building. It's been destroyed, but nevertheless, it's a foundation of a building. Probably a munition bunker, given the high walls and the direct access to the road. And given that there's rubble strewn everywhere, it is entirely possible that this was blown. Buildings collapse, they don't scatter themselves over a wide area, like all the way over here. And in the woods here, there are pieces of what used to be in there. So certainly things were destroyed here after the war. Certainly there was more than munitions production going on in here, and definitely there are undiscovered things in here. Now, are we talking about gold and treasure? That's an important question because everybody thinks we're looking for the gold train and treasures and art. The top of the SS was divided into different compartments, just like the CIA and any other intelligence service today. The guy in the office doesn't know what the guy in the office next to him does, and vice versa. And that means that if there was a top of the SS, close to a Himmler, Kammler, Bormann, that said we need to hide things, all the other SS men wouldn't know. Or if there are smaller individual groups within the SS who had access to gold and loot and paintings and so on, they might want to hide it for themselves. Was there a giant uniform Third Reich plot to hide gold and treasures after the war for the Fourth Reich, or for individuals for themselves, hoping they would escape the reckoning with the Allies or the Russians? Certainly, why not? I have no problem accepting that there were individual soldiers, individual groups within the SS, or top leadership commands saying, preserve what you can, the war is lost. We have heard in 44, Bormann said that to German industry. So yes, things hiding in the mountains? I have no problem believing there is. I have no problem accepting that there isn't. Is it a giant cache of French art and paintings? We better find it soon because it gets pretty damp in these tunnels.
Now, this entire area was under the security of the SS, who was also in charge of rocket development. And interestingly enough, there's a foundry here in Lesna Borovna, which I probably pronounced wrong, I am sorry, where there is very interesting signs of rocket engine testing. And now we're not looking at the V2 rocket testing, we're looking at smaller scale, like the Rheinboten, ground-to-air missiles. Smaller engines could have been tested in this room. It certainly does look... There is 5 centimeter thick glass in those little slits. And you had a facility that was well built.
Now we knew they were planning launch facilities here. This wartime photo have emerged and it needs a lot more scrutiny and research when I get there. But this very much looked like a Rheinboten launch facility.
And also when I talk about helicopters, the Germans were the first to field operational helicopters. And there are several witnesses post-war that has seen helicopters in this area land now at airfields that are no longer there. However, one of them was sworn to secrecy on penalty of death that he didn't see this, which I find is an interesting statement because helicopters were really not secret technology at any point. They were in the early 30s. You had thousands of people in the Berlin Stadium and at the Olympics that were seen displays of helicopters. But the German military fielded operational helicopters and they were seen in this area. Now certainly you're not going to test new helicopters in the Henge because a few feet to the left or the right and will result in screaming, death of burning, debris and dying and having a very sad traumatic day. However, it is possible that, as we have heard testimony supposedly from Großrosen prisoners near the Henge, have seen something hover in that area. VTOL aircraft, helicopters, were in that area. Not making any parallels, because I haven't seen the actual testimony in paper, so I'm not going to incorporate that. I'm just saying that things that were taken off and landing vertically existed, were in operation, and was in this area as well. And something else that was in this area. When we speak of the numbers of money we follow, and we speak of the number of slave labor we follow, remember at the other Riese locations, all the prisoners, when it was that time, were just let go or abandoned. However, here at Ludwigsdorf, at the MOLTKE plant, where munitions were produced and explosives were produced that was used in the Riese project. Remember, Ludwigsdorf, MOLTKE, was not part of the Riese project. It was separate. And skilled technical labor were used here. And they were in a camp just down the road around the bend. 2,000 of them. And they did not meet with the same fate as those who were just released.
Concentration camps in this region was a part of Großrosen concentration camp.
So that makes sense because it was always claimed that prisoners from Großrosen that would then have come here saw something, or the Henge, that they were not supposed to. That was always one of the claims. That was one of the claims for the Glocke. That one of the prisoners saw it. What direction is the Henge from here?
It's this direction, yeah.
So that was this direction here.
Yeah.
How many prisoners were stationed here or living here?
We don't know. I think thousands of people. Maybe 5, maybe 6.
Do we know were they prisoners of war, or do we know where they came from?
From all of Europe. The basis of the prisoner buildings, barracks,
Red bricks.
today.
So these prisoners, were they technical specialists?
Yeah.
They were just
No. Only physical workers. Here was a few buildings, barracks, in this direction. Yeah.
Do we know anything about if anybody survived, or do we know, are there any personal accounts?
Only one woman. She was. She spent 2 or 3 days under the killed people.
Really?
Really?
So they literally shot the prisoners at the end.
Yeah.
There was no.
All of prisoners of this camp.
So everybody who knew something, they really were shot.
Yeah.
So basically everybody who came through this door and worked here, except for one woman, did not come back out alive.
On the higher level, in this building, was the hospital for prisoners. Hospital.
Okay. And this was the concentration camp that was here.
Yeah, concentration camps, camp for prisoners. They worked in this area, Ossówka, Soboń, and here was a part of concentration camps in the system Gross Rosen.
So this building existed before the war.
Yeah.
They just took it over.
Yeah.
But the very one single reason there is to keep looking is that thousands of people died building this, creating these facilities. And I think we owe it to them and their families to find out why. These were people. During war, different countries, different peoples, they have disagreements and they kill each other because that is war. Many of these were civilians who was on the wrong side of an occupying power that was put in camps, and because of their skill set, put to work in places where they never emerged from alive. And I think we owe it to them to find out why. Nothing can be that important that the thousands and thousands of people that were worked to death or actively shot to cover up a secret. I think that's good enough reason to do this on this show. And there's always time for more Maginot Line Forts.